Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today, we are entering Volume 9 of the 10-volume collection of Emerson's journals. So we are almost there, and we are up to journal collection 47 now, and this dates from 1856, and Emerson will turn 53 years old in this year. And as always, we start with a biographical update from the editors. The new year found Mr. Emerson in the West, where he gave a lecture almost every weekday night through January in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio. The exposure and discomfort were great, but he bore them as a philosopher should. On January 3rd he wrote, quote, "A cold, raw country this, and plenty of night traveling, and arriving at 4 in the morning to take the last and worst bed in the tavern. Advancing day brings mercy and favor to me, but not the sleep. Mercury 15 degrees below zero. I find well-disposed, kindly people among these sinewy farmers of the north, but in all that is called cultivation they are only 10 years old, so that there is plenty of non-adaptation and yawning gulfs never bridged in this ambitious lyceum system they are trying to import." End quote. And a week later he writes from Springfield, Illinois, quote, "Here I am in the deep mud of the prairies, misled, I fear, into this bog, not by a will-o'-the-wisp, but by a young New Hampshire editor, who overestimated the strength of both of us, and fancied I should glitter in the prairie and draw the prairie birds and waders. It rains and thaws incessantly, and if we step off the short street we may go up to the shoulders, perhaps in mud. My chamber is a cabin, and my fellow boarders are legislators. 2 or 3 governors or ex-governors live in the house. But in the prairie we are new men just come, and must not stand for trifles." End quote. A little later, cold set in beyond remembrance or tradition. The Mississippi froze from Natchez northward. Yet Mr. Emerson's constitution withstood the hardships, and he took an active interest in the growing country and the men who were breaking the way. End note. January 1st, 1856. In Dixon I talked with Mr. Dixon, the pioneer founder of the city. His full-length portrait was hanging in the town hall where we were. He is 80 years old and a great favorite with the people. His family have all died, but some grandchildren remain. He, who has made so many rich, is a poor man, which, it seems, is a common fortune here. Sutter, the California discoverer of gold, is poor. It looks as if we must have a talent for misfortune to miss so many opportunities as these men who have owned the whole township and not saved a competence. He is a correct, quiet man, was first a tailor, then a stage owner, and mail agent, etc. I went down the Galena River, once Bean River, Phoebe, then Fever, now Galena River, 4 or 5 miles in a sleigh with Mr. McMasters to the Marsden Lead, so-called a valuable lead mine, and went into it. Marsden, it seems, was a poor farmer here, and sold out his place and went to California, found no gold, and came back and bought his land again, and in digging to clear out a spring of water, stumbled on this most valuable quote-unquote lead, as they call it, of lead ore. They can get up to 7,000 pounds of the ore in a day by a couple of laborers, and the smelters will come to the spot and buy the ore at 3 cents a pound, so that he found California here. He at once called in his brothers and divided the mine with them. One of them sold out his share, foolishly, for $12,000. The others retained theirs. Mr. Shetland said 75 or $100,000 had already been derived from this mine, and perhaps as much more remains. Honorable Mr. Turner, of Freeport, said to me that it is not usually the first settlers who become rich, but the second comers. The first, he said, are often visionary men, the second are practical. The first 2 settlers of Rockford died insolvent, and he named similar cases in other towns, I think Beloit. An idealist, if he have the sensibilities and habits of those whom I know, is very ungrateful. He craves and enjoys every chemical property and every elemental force, loves pure air, water, light, caloric, wheat, flesh, salt, and sugar, the blood coursing in his own veins, and the grasp of friendly hands, and uses the meat he eats to preach against matter as malignant, and to praise mind which he very hollowly and treacherously serves. Beware of hypocrisy. Beloit, January 9th. I fancied in this fierce cold weather, mercury varying between 20 to 30 degrees below zero for the last week, that Illinois lands would be at last discount, and the agent, who at Dixon was selling great tracts, would be better advised to keep them for milder days, since 100 miles of prairie in such days as these are not worth the poorest shed or cellar in the towns. But my easy landlord assured me, quote, we had no cold weather in Illinois, only now, and then Indian summer and cool nights. He looked merrily at his window panes, opaque with a stratum of frost, and said that his was a fashionable first-class hotel, with window lights of ground glass. This climate and people are a new test for the wares of a man of letters. All this thin, watery matter freezes. 'Tis only the smallest portion of alcohol that remains good. At the Lyceum, the stout Illinoisan, after a short trial, walks out of the hall. The committee tells you that the people want a hearty laugh, and Stark and Saxe and Park Benjamin, who give them that, are heard with joy. Well, I think with Governor Reynolds, the people are always right, in a sense, and that the man of letters is to say, these are the new conditions to which I must conform. The architect who is asked to build a house to go upon the sea must not build a Parthenon or a square house, but a ship. And Shakespeare or Franklin or Aesop, coming to Illinois, would say, I must give my wisdom a comic form instead of tragics or elegiacs, and well I know to do it, and he is no master who cannot vary his forms and carry his own end triumphantly through the most difficult. Mr. Sweet, a telegraph agent on the Chicago and Rock River line, said he can tell the name of the operator by the accent of his dispatch by the ear, just as readily as he knows the handwriting of his friends. Every operator has his own manner or accent. An operator usually reads more correctly and quickly by the ear than by the eye. Some good operators never learn to read by the ear. Boys make the best operators, and in 6 months a boy of 16 was worth $45 a month in an office at Chicago. The rule of their experience is never to establish a telegraph line until the railroad is built. It cannot sooner pay. At Beloit on Tuesday night, January 8, the mercury was at 27 degrees and 28 degrees below zero. It has been bitterly cold for a fortnight, a cold night they call, quote-unquote, a singer. The hard times of Illinois were from 1837 to 1845 and onward, when pork was worth 12 shillings a hundred, and men journeyed with loads of wheat and pork 100 miles or more to Chicago, and sold their wheat for 26 cents a bushel, and were obliged to sell their team to get home again. Mr. Jenks, a stage agent and livery stable keeper, told us of his experiences, and when he left Chicago to go eastward, he would not have given $3 for a warranty deed of the state of Illinois. Hoosier meant Southerner. Hoosiers and Yankees would fight for the land. Yankees, when fighting men, would fight by the day. Quote, the Hoosiers are good to begin, but they cave. End quote. Emmons, Esquire of Michigan, said to me that he had said he wished it might be a criminal offense to bring an English law book into a court in this country, so foolish and mischievous is our slavery to English precedent. There are times when the intellect is so active that everything seems to run to meet it. Its supplies are found without much thought as to studies. Knowledge runs to the man, and the man runs to knowledge. In spring, when the snow melts, the maple trees run with sugar, and you cannot get tubs fast enough, but it is only a few days. The hunter on the prairie at the right season has no need of choosing his ground. East, west, by the river, by the timber near the farm, from the farm, he is everywhere by his game. Here is a road, Michigan Southern, which runs through 4 sovereign states, a judicial being which has no judicial sovereign. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois franchise has to yield its eminent domain, and the remedy is appraisal and payment of damages. But unfortunately, when as now, the Michigan Central is to be bereaved of its monopoly, which it had bought and paid for, the jury to appraise the damage done is taken from the population, aggrieved by the Michigan Central. I asked, why not take a jury from other states? People here are alive to a benefaction derived from railroads which is inexpressibly great, and vastly exceeding any intentional philanthropy. My banker here at Adrian, Mr. L., is of opinion that to run on a bank for gold is a criminal offense, and ought to be punished by the state's prison. He delights, he frankly told me, to make such people pay 3 or 4% a month for money. Seek things in their purity. Well, we try on each subject to accost, to ascend to principles, to dip our pen in the blackest of the pot, and to be sure find the cause of the trait in some organ, as spleen or bone or blood. We are not nearer, we are still outside. Nature itself is nothing but a skin, and all these but coarser cuticles. A god or genius sits regent over every plant and animal, and causes this, and knits this to that, after an order or plan which is intellectual. The botanist, the physician, is not then the man deepest immersed in nature, as if he were ready to bear apples or to shoot out 4 legs, but one filled with the lightest and purest air, who sympathizes with the creative spirit, anticipates the tendency, and where the bird will next alight, being himself full of the same tendency. Hospitality consists in a little fire, a little food, but enough, and an immense quiet. In England it is a great deal of fine food, and a fire, and immense decorum. When I see the waves of Lake Michigan tossed in the bleak snowstorm, I see how small and inadequate the common poet is. But Tennyson, with his eagle over the sea, has shown his sufficiency. Quote, in the American backwoods there is nothing of those social and artistic enjoyments which ennoble man, whilst they dissatisfy him. What man would live without the poesy and sounds, colors and rhymes? Unhappy people that is condemned to this privation. German paper. William Little came to church and heard my sermon against minding trifles. He had told me, had he preached, he should have taken the other side. Probably not one hearer besides thought so far on the subject. The railroads have pretended low fares, and instead of 75 cents, I pay for a passage to Boston from Concord 60 cents. And the trip costs 1 hour instead of 2, in 1/2 hours. Well, I have really paid, in the depreciation of my railroad stock, $600 or $700 a year for the last few years, or say 100 a year since the roads were built, and I shall be glad to know that I am at the end of my losses on this head. A writer in the Boston Transcript says that, quote, just in proportion to the morality of a people will be the expansion of the credit system, end quote, which sounds to me like better political economy than I often hear. Lectures. 1. France. 2. English civilization. 3. Anglo-American. 4. Stonehenge. 5. The age. 6. Poetry. 7. Beauty. 8. The scholar. For beauty. Use of Gems in Landor's Pericles and Aspasia, and Patmore's Angel in the House. They called old France a despotism tempered with epigrams. Wherever the epigrams grow, they are pretty sure to make room for themselves and temper the despotism. What can you do with the Talleyrand? Quote, Sire, no government has prospered that has resisted me, end quote. So in politics with De Retz or with Webster. Quote, Where shall I go, end quote, said Webster. There is the Whig Party and the Democratic Party and Mr. Webster. It soon appears that the epigram, or Webster, is a party too, much more in the courts where he was really sovereign. Choate said that, once a candidate for the presidency, it was impossible to get that virus quite out of a man's constitution, as Everett Webster casts down to Pratt and Mellon. February 29th. Truth. It is not wise to talk, as men do, of reason as the gift of God bestowed, etc., or of reasoning from nature up to nature's God, etc. The intellectual power is not the gift, but the presence of God. Nor do we reason to the being of God, but God goes with us into nature when we go or think at all. Truth is always new and wild as the wild air, and is alive. The mind is always true when there is mind, and it makes no difference that the premises are false. We arrive at true conclusions. Mr. Arnold, with whom I talked at New Bedford, saw as much as this, and when Penn's treacheries were enumerated, replied, quote, Well, what if he did? It was only Penn who did it. He told of the talking Quaker in Maine who claimed acquaintance with Piatt, saying to him, quote, You know I am your convert. Piatt answered, quote, Yes, I see there's my convert, for my master knows nothing of thee. Remember the Indian hymn, quote, God only I perceive, God only I adore. The Bible will not be ended until the creation is. If I knew only Thoreau, I should think cooperation of good men impossible. Must we always talk for victory, and never once for truth, for comfort and joy? Centrality he has, and penetration, strong understanding, and the higher gifts, the insight of the real or from the real, and the moral rectitude that belongs to it. But all this and all his resources of wit and invention are lost to me in every experiment, year after year, that I make to hold intercourse with his mind. Always some weary, captious paradox to fight you with, and the time and temper wasted. I find good sense in the German Atlantis, which thinks astronomy overprized, which at present is a cold desert science, too dependent on the mechanic who grinds a lens, and too little on the philosopher. So of chemistry and geology. It finds few deeps in them, no genial universal maxims. The little world of the heart is larger, richer, deeper than the spaces of astronomy, which takes such a row of pompous ciphers to express. And when the same devotion shall be given to ethics and jurisprudence as now is given to natural science, we shall have ideas and insights and wisdom instead of numbers and formulas. The most important effect of modern astronomy has been the tapping our theological conceit and upsetting Calvinism. I value myself, not when I do what is called the commanding duty of this Monday or Tuesday, but when I leave it to do the duty of a remote day, as, for instance, to write a line or find a new fact, a missing link in my essay on, quote, memory, or on, imagination. There's a short French quotation with no translation and footnotes. When the minister presented himself to the North Carolina Unitarian Church agent to demand his wages for preaching, he asked, Who sent you here? The Lord sent me. The Lord sent you? I don't believe the Lord knows there is any such man. I have much that feeling about these pretended poets, whom I am sure the Lord of Parnassus knows not of. 2 ways. The most important effect of Copernicus was not on astronomy, but on Calvinism. Tapping the conceit of man, and geology introduces new measures of antiquity. Now and then leaps a word or a fact to light which is no man's invention, but the common instinct. Thus, all men are born free and equal, though denied by all politics, is the key word of our modern civilization. 'Tis strange that Sir John Franklin and his picked men, with all the resources of English art, perished of famine where Eskimo lived, and found them, and continue to live. Herschel said chemistry had made such progress that it could no longer be that men would perish or famine, for sawdust could be made into food. And yet men in Sligo and Cape Verde and New York have been dying of famine ever since. 'Tis answered, yes, you can convert woolen and cotton rags into sugar, but 'tis very expensive, and 'tis like the Duke of Sussex' recommendation that the poor should eat curry. 'Tis a geographic problem whether the Mississippi, running from the depressed polar zone to the elevated equatorial region 2,500 miles, does it not run uphill? Manners. If you talk with J.K. Mills or J.M. Forbes or any other State Street man, you find that you are talking with all State Street, and if you're impressionable to that force, why they have great advantage, are very strong men. But if you talk with Thoreau or Newcomb or Alcott, you talk only with one man. He brings only his own force. But for that very reason, that the conventional requires softness or impressionability to the dear little urbanities in you, if you abound in your own sense, they, in other words, the first, are weak, and soon at your mercy. But the others, those wise hermits, who speak from their thought, speak from the deep heart of men, from a far wide public, the public of all sane and good men, from a broad humanity. And Greek and Syrian, Parthian and Chinese, Cherokee and Kanaka hear them speaking in their own tongue. Mr. Eaton of Malden told me that when Father Taylor was about going to Europe, he heard him preach, and he said, "To be sure, I am sorry to leave my own babes, but he who takes care of every whale and can give him a ton of herrings for a breakfast will find food for my babes." I find it easy to translate all Napoleon's techniques into all of mine, and his official advices are to me more literary and philosophical than the memoirs of the Academy. See in Atlantis for February 1856, page 118, how Carnot translated mechanics into politics. Sin is when a man trifles with himself and is untrue to his own constitution. Everything is the cause of itself. We have seen art coming back to veracity. Napoleon from pedantry of old tactics to the making the art of war a piece of common sense. Carlyle, armed with the same realism in his speculation on society and government, red tape, etc. Nor let the musician think he can be a frivolous person and a parasite. He must be musician throughout in his vote, in his economy, in his prayer. Alston said, "His heart should make the artist happy." "A strong nature feels itself brought into the world for its own development, and not for the approbation of the public." Goethe. Here we stand, silent, unknown, dumb as mountains, inspiring curiosity in each other, and what we wish to know is whether there be in you an interior organization as finished and excellent as the body. For if there be, then there is a rider to the horse, then has nature a lord. Blow the horn at the gate of Egremont Castle, which none but the great Egremont can blow. The outward organization is admirable, the geology, the astronomy, the anatomy, all excellent, but 'tis all a half, and enlarged by astronomy never so far remains a half. It requires a will as perfectly organized. A perfect freedom is the only counterpart to nature. When that is born and ripened and tried, and says, Here stand I cannot otherwise, nature surrenders as meekly as the ass on which Jesus rode. 'Tis because the man is by much the larger half, and though we exaggerate his tools and sciences, yet the moment we face a hero or a sage, the arts and civilizations are peu de cas. There are 4 sweets in my confectionery: sugar, beauty, freedom, and revenge, said Egyptiacus. Black star, builders of dungeons in the air, through nature's ample range in thought to rove, and start at man the single mourner there. Young. This passing hour is an edifice which the Omnipotent cannot rebuild. The Missouri and the Mississippi, after their junction, run 40 miles side by side in the same bed before they fully mix. The rate of interest in Illinois runs from 10 to 40%. In Boston, from 5 to 10 and 12%. Yet does not the capital of Boston realize this difference of level and flow down into Illinois? Well, in England and in America, there is the widest difference of altitude between the culture of their scholars and that of the Germans, and here are in America a nation of Germans living with the organon of Hegel in their hands, which makes the discoveries and thinking of the English and Americans look of a Chinese narrowness, and yet good easy dunces that we are, we never suspect our inferiority. Woman should find in man her guardian. Silently she looks for that, and when she finds, as she instantly does, that he is not, she betakes her to her own defenses, and does the best she can. But when he is her guardian, all goes well for both. Your subject is quite indifferent, if you really speak out. If I met Shakespeare or Montaigne or Goethe, I should only aim to understand correctly what they said. They might talk of what they would. When people object to me my topics of England or France or natural history, 'tis only that they fear I shall not think on these subjects, but shall consult my ease and repeat commonplaces. The way to the centre is everywhere equally short. A general has always troops enough, if he only knows how to employ those he has, and bivouacs with them, said Bonaparte. Every breath of air is the carrier of the universal mind. Thus, for subjects, I do not know what is more tedious than dedications or pieces of flattery to grandees. Yet in Hafitz it would not do to skip them, since his daredevil muse is never better shown. A practical man is the hobby of the age. Well, when I read German philosophy, or wrote verses, I was willing to concede that there might be too much of these, and that the Western pioneer, with axe on his shoulder and still moving west as the settlements approached him, had his merits. On further consideration of this practical quality, by which our people are proud to be marked, I concede its excellence. But practice or practicalness consists in the consequent or logical following out of a good theory. See Atlantis, February 1855. Here are they practical, in other words, they confound the means with the ends, and lose the ends thereby out of sight. Freedom, worth, and beauty of life. Classic and romantic. The classic art was the art of necessity. Modern romantic art bears the stamp of caprice and chance. Republics run into romance when they lose sight of the inner necessity and organism that must be in their laws and act from whim. Wagner made music again classic. Goethe says, I call classic the sound and romantic the sick. Saint Beuve defines classic, and then there is a long French quotation without any translation, so per my rule, I will skip over it. Eugene Sue Dumas, etc., when they begin a story, do not know how it will end. But Walter Scott, when he began The Bride of Lammermoor, had no choice, nor Shakespeare in Macbeth. But Madame George Sand, though she writes fast and miscellaneously, is yet fundamentally classic and necessitated. And I, who tack things strangely enough together, and consult my ease rather than my strength, and often write on the other side, am yet an adorer of the one. To be classic, then, de rigueur, is the prerogative of a vigorous mind who is able to execute what he conceives. The classic unfolds, the romantic adds. The discovery of America is an antique or classic work. Paris. Of great cities you cannot compute the influences. April 5th. Walden fired a cannonade yesterday of 100 guns, but not in honor of the birth of Napoleon. Aunt Mary said of Talleyrand that he was not organized for the future state. Aunt Mary is jealous of all the newer friends of her friends, and cannot bear either X or Y or the fame of Z. She reminds one in these days of an old aristocrat, say Queen Elizabeth, shaking the Duchess of Blank on her deathbed, or Sarah of Marlborough as she walks with her stick to the oyster shop. Classic and romantic. I think I can show that France cleaves to the form and loses the substance, as in the famous unities of her drama, and in her poetry itself, in the whole quote-unquote classicality of her turn of mind, which is only apery. Quote, for France doth ape the lion's shape, Menander's speech, quote, that he had finished the comedy, all but the verses, and Burke, who studied the statistics of his speech, but left the illustration and ornament to the impulse of speaking. Thy voice is sweet, Muscataquid, repeats the music of the rain, but sweeter rivers silent flit through thee, as through the conquered plain. Thou art shut in thy banks, but the stream I love flows in thy water, and flows through rocks, and through the air, and through darkness, and through men and women. I hear and see the inundation and the eternal spending of the stream in winter and in summer, in men and animals, in passion and thought. Happy are they who can hear it. I see thy brimming, eddying stream in thy enchantment. For thou changest every rock in thy bed into a gem, all is real opal and agate, and at will thou pavest with diamonds. Take them away from thy stream, and they are poor shards and flints. So is it with me today. The property proves too much for the man, and now all the men of science, art, intellect, are pretty sure to degenerate into selfish housekeepers dependent on wine, coffee, furnace, gaslight, and furniture. Then things swing the other way, and we suddenly find that civilization crowed too soon, that what we bragged as triumphs were treacheries, that we have opened the wrong door and let the enemy into the castle, that civilization was a mistake, that nothing is so vulgar as a great warehouse of rooms full of furniture and trumpery, that in the circumstances the best wisdom were an auction or a fire, since the foxes and birds have the right of it, with a warm hole to fend the weather and no more, that a penthouse, to fend the sun and wind and rain, is the house which makes no tax on the owner's time and thought, and which he can leave when the sun reaches noon. What need have I of book or priest? And every star is Bethlehem's star. I have as many as there are yellow flowers in the grass. So many saints and saviors, so many high behaviors, are there to him who is himself, as thou, alive, and only sees what he doth give. Monochord. Aunt Mary cannot sympathize with children. I know several persons whose world is only large enough for one person, and each of them, though he were to be the last man, would like the executioner in Hood's poem, guillotine the last but one. Elizabeth Hoare said of Aunt Mary, quote, she thinks much more of her bonnet and of other people's bonnets than they do, And she sends Elizabeth from Dan to Beersheba to find a bonnet that does not conform, while Miss Hoare, whom she severely taxes with conforming, is satisfied with anything she finds in the shops. She tramples on the common humanities all day, and they rise as ghosts and torment her at night. Kings and Nobles. Tycho Brahe refused, 1574, for a long time to publish his observations upon the remarkable star in Cassiopeia, lest he should thus cast a stain upon his nobility. Fame. Copernicus's discoveries, insinuated themselves into ecclesiastical minds by the very reluctance of their author to bring them into notice, Brewster, Life of Newton, Vol.1, page 259. Greatness. To a grand interest, a superficial success is of no account. Stakes. A man, to get the advantage of the ideal man, turns himself into several men, by using his eyes today when he is loving, and tomorrow when he is spiteful, and the third day when he is merry, and so on, as the astronomer uses the earth as a cart to carry him to the two ends of its orbit to find the parallax of a star. What a barren-witted pate am I, says the scholar. I will go see whether I have lost my reason. The right conditions must be observed. Principally, he must have leave to be himself. We go to dine with M and N and O and P, and to be sure they begin to be something else than they were. Keep the ground, feel the roots, domesticate yourself. I think of Andrews Norton, who did not like toasts and sentiments because they interfered with the hilarity of the occasion. What kind of a pump is that which cannot draw, but only deliver? I think the Germans have an integrity of mind which sets their science above all other. They have not this science in scraps, this science on stilts. They have posed certain philosophical facts on which all is built, the doctrine of immanence, as it is called, by which everything is the cause of itself, or stands there for its own, and repeats in its own all other, the ground of everything is immanent in that thing, Everything is organic freedom also, not to add, but to grow and unfold. They purify, they sweeten, they warm and ennoble by seeing the hearts to be indispensable, not in scraps, not on stilts. In music it was once the doctrine. The text is nothing, the score is all, and even the worse the text, the better the score. But Wagner said the text must be fixed to the score, and from the first must be inspired from the score. So in chemistry, Mulder said, "For a good chemist, the first condition is he shall know nothing of philosophy." But Oersted and Humboldt saw and said that chemistry must be the handmaid of moral science. Do you not see how nature avenges herself of the pedantry? The wits excluded from the academies met in clubs and threw the academy into the shade. I know a song which, though it be sung never so loud, few can hear, only 6 or 7 or 8 persons, yet they who hear it become young again. When it is sung, the stars twinkle gladly, and the moon bends nearer the earth. Vafthrudnir. The horse taught me something, the titmouse whispered a secret in my ear, and the Lespedeza looked at me as I passed. Will the academicians in their annual report please tell me what they said? I know a song which is more hurtful than strychnine or the kiss of the asp. It blasts those who hear it, changes their color and shape, and dissipates their substance. It is called time. Yet they who hear it shed their age and take their youth again. Whipple said of the author of "Leaves of Grass" that he had every leaf but the fig leaf. April 26th. The audience that assembled to hear my lectures in these 6 weeks called the Effete of Boston. As Linnaeus delighted in finding that 7-stamened flower which alone gave him a 7th class, or filled a gap in his system, So I know a man who served as intermediate between two acquaintances of mine, not else to be approximated. I can well wait, said Elizabeth Hoare, all winter, if sure to blossom an apple tree in spring, but not if perhaps I am dead wood and ought to burn now. Subject for lecture is the art of taking a walk. I would not ask Ellery Channing, like the little girl, Mamma wishes, sir, you would begin to be funny. Indeed, quite the reverse, for his written fun is very bad, and as to his serious letter, the very best that to Ward in Europe is unreproducible. Would you bottle the efflux of a June noon and sell it in your shop? But if he could be engaged again into kindly letters, he has that which none else could give. But 'tis rare and rich compound of gods and dwarfs, and best of humanity, that goes to walk. Can you bring home the summits of Wachusett and Monadnock and the Uncanunnock, the Savin fields of Lincoln, and the sedge and reeds of Flint Pond, the savage woods beyond Nut Brook towards White Pond? He can. Do you think I am in great terror of being shot? It is curious that Thoreau goes to a house to say with a little preface what he has just read or observed, delivers it in lump, is quite inattentive to any comment or thought which any of the company offer on the matter, nay, is merely interrupted by it, and when he has finished his report, departs with precipitation. Materialists. Economical geology. Economical astronomy with a view to annexation, if it could be, to navigation, and chemistry and natural history for utility. Yes, rightly enough, but is there no right wishing to know what is, without reaping a rent or commission? Now their natural history is profane. They do not know the bird, the fish, the tree they describe. The ambition that, quote, hurries them after truth takes away the power to attain it, end quote. This charge that I make against English science, that it bereaves nature of its charm, lies equally against all European science. Quote, mathematics, said Copernicus to the Pope, are written for mathematicians. End quote. The comfort of Alcott's mind is the connection in which he sees whatever he sees. He is never dazzled by a spot of color or a gleam of light to value that thing by itself, but forever and ever is prepossessed by the undivided one behind it and all. I do not know where to find in men or books a mind so valuable to faith. His own invariable faith inspires faith in others. I valued Miss Bacon's study of Shakespeare simply for the belief that they showed in cause and effect, that a first-rate genius was not a prodigy and stupefying anomaly, but built up step by step as a tree or a house is, with a sufficient cause, and one that with diligence might be found or assigned, for every difference and every superiority to the dunce or average man. For every opinion or sentence of Alcott, a reason may be sought and found, not in his will or fancy, but in the necessity of nature itself, which has degraded that fatal impression on his susceptible soul. He is as good a lens or a mirror, a beautiful susceptibility, every impression on which is not to be reasoned against or derided, but to be accounted for, and until accounted for, registered as an indisputable addition to our catalogue of natural facts. There are defects in the lens, and errors of refraction and position, etc., to be allowed for, and it needs one acquainted with the lens by frequent use to make these allowances, but 'tis the best instrument I have ever met with. Every man looks a piece of luck, but he is a piece of the mosaic accurately measured and ground to fit into the gaps he fills, such as Parker or Garrison or Carlyle or Hegel is, and with good optics, I suppose, we should find as nice fitting down to the bores and loafers. I admire that poetry which no man wrote, no poet less than the genius of humanity itself, and which is to be read in my theology and the effect of pictures or sculptures or drama or cities or sciences on me. My son is coming to get his Latin lesson without me. My son is coming to do without me, and I am coming to do without Plato or Goethe or Alcott. To carry temperance very high and very thoroughly into life and into intellect, and that with insight of its necessity and efficacy. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's journal collection, number 47, dating from the year 1856, when the author was 53 years old. Thank you for listening.